This lecture covers OSHA's comprehensive approach to ergonomics. Their approach started in 2002 and continues to this day, is what's identified as a four-prong approach, just meaning four prongs such as on a fork, or four areas that they're looking at. They're looking at guidelines, enforcement, outreach and assistance, and National Advisory Committee. So those are the four. Starting out with the guidelines, OSHA decided instead of everybody having to do ergonomics, so every industry, every company, everywhere, they're going to target specific industries where there are ergonomic issues, and the ergonomic issues are big. And so they started by looking at industries that had the highest rates of work-related injuries and illnesses tied to ergonomics. And so the year that they started producing guidelines, 2003, the first set they produced was for the nursing homes. And if you thought about or think about, well, what types of ergonomic injuries would you see in nursing homes? So the employees, why are they being injured? And you would probably realize, well, they're moving patients, they're lifting patients, they're moving patients from bed to bed, from bed to restroom, from bed to wherever they're eating. And so they have to move people. People are very heavy, and so you start to see back injuries. And so they targeted nursing homes because they have high rates of back injuries. The second industry that they targeted was retail grocery stores. So grocery stores. That came out in 2004. And grocery stores, if you thought about why would they have ergonomics injuries, you realize that, well, they have all types of tasks that are repetitive, that are handling. And so, for example, your cashiers, they're handling lots of products repetitively as they scan items, as they lift items that you put on their conveyor belts. And so there's a lot of repetitive hand movement. Their stockers are moving heavy objects, and so they're loading, unloading, stocking shelves, so a lot of material handling. Their delis, they cut meat, and so similar to your meat packing, meat processing, they're dealing with a lot of the risk factors. Your bakery, they do a lot of repetitive movement of stirring, icing, kneading, so on and so on. Okay, so grocery stores have a whole host of problems. Your third industry is poultry processing. And essentially this was an update of your meat packing. The early meat packing referred to red meat. This one is poultry. The incident rates I had you calculate our example problem. We talked about that the poultry processing has exposure to the 6 risk factors. There's no way around those 6 risk factors. They're still present, although you try to reduce exposure, but still MSDs are somewhat expected in that industry due to the nature of the work. And so this guideline was giving information on preventing those injuries. In 2007, they had OSHA released a guideline for the shipyard industry. They have construction, material handling, ship repair, and so they've got a lot of varied heavy work. And then in 2012, OSHA released a guideline for foundries, and that's what my picture refers to. Foundries produce metal parts from melted metals. They cast parts, they form parts, and so they're producing formed metal. So they have heavy work. And so there are 5 sets of guidelines right now for specific industries where the need is high, meaning high rates of injuries. The second prong focused on enforcement. And so enforcement, OSHA wanted to look at specifically, identify, so on, industries with high LWDII rates. This stands for lost work day injury and illness rates. And so basically, again, we're going to focus on where there's a need, where they have ergonomics injuries. Industries, companies that are not doing well, that have higher LWDII than other companies within industry, obviously would be the focus, and they might have a visit from OSHA as compared to industries with lower LWDII rates. The The lost workday focuses on severity rather than just purely the number of cases. It focuses on high severity cases, and so cases where they're losing a number of days, meaning they're more injured, their injuries are worse than just a pure count of cases. Still without a standard, with only having some guidelines, OSHA has to issue a citation based on a violation of the general duty clause. So we'll come back to that. So violation of the general duty clause for having those high lost workday injury and illness rates that you're not preventing. Third prong is outreach and assistance, and so they were going to be tough on enforcement, but they also wanted to be friendly to provide information where needed, and so OSHA built a number of alliances. Alliances are just these signed agreements between industries and OSHA or organizations and OSHA, so that we have a friendly relationship that says that, well, this industry or these professionals are going to look at ergonomic related injuries. They're going to come up with solutions. They're going to be implementing these solutions in their workplaces throughout the industry, and so generally the industries are doing a lot of the work instead of OSHA doing a lot of the work. And OSHA justified that by saying that, well, within your own industry, you know what your problems are, you know what your solutions are, and so why don't you guys get together and work on it yourselves? And so there were alliances with footwear, the footwear industry, with the apparel, so the clothing types of industries. There were alliances with the furniture making. There were alliances with organizations such as the U.S. Postal Service, with AIHA and ASSE, figuring that these professionals could contribute and add to this problem. OSHA also put out e-tools, and so they've developed electronic tools that they put on their website. We've already looked at the computer workstation e-tool. But they also have e-tools for problem jobs, problem industries such as sewing, such as baggage handling at your airports. They have e-tools on, again, this meat processing, meat packing. They have e-tools on warehousing, so handling a lot of warehousing. Handling a lot of items, a lot of objects. They have an e-tool on the printing industry, and so the thought is, let's put this information out so everybody, even workers, can help protect themselves. And so it's available on OSHA's website, OSHA.gov, for anybody to look at. The fourth prong is a National Advisory Committee. This was formed back in 2002. They had a 15-member panel. Pictures down below. OSHA's intent was to get these people together, these experts from academia, these experts from industry, these experts from union labor, the experts who have some knowledge, get them together, these 15 members. They produced a report telling OSHA what research still needs to be done, how to outreach to industries, to workers, to get OSHA's information out to whoever needs it. And so they produced a report, and OSHA thanked them and disbanded this prong, and so it's no longer a prong, in 2004. So now we're down to basically a three-prong type of approach. And so what does a company need to do? What should they be doing? Well, what they should be doing is described in the guidelines. And again, OSHA made these very generic so that even though it was a nursing home or a retail grocery store, the guidelines themselves are very generic, so that any industry, any company could take the guidelines and adapt it for their own industry. And so they put together a 7-element ergonomic process that says basically if you're addressing these 7 elements, you have a good shot at having an effective ergonomic process. If you're missing one of the elements, chances are maybe it might not be as effective as it could be. And so starting out, element number 1 is to provide management support. You know from your other classes that management has to be involved. It has to be providing direction. And so OSHA says you need to have strong management support. Management has to provide the goals of the process. So what are we trying to accomplish? They have to assign responsibilities. Who does what? who's responsible for what, they also have to provide the resources. And for example, the funding. If you need to do something, implement training, implement a control, you need the funding to do that. And so management support has to be strong. The second part is to involve employees. And basically, employees have vital information for the ergonomics process. They know what their jobs are. They know what parts of the jobs are the hardest that causes them any discomfort. They may have ideas on how to fix it to make it better. If you involve them in the selection of controls, then if they get to help pick, they're more likely to accept them and to use them, and so you need to involve employees. Third step is to identify problems, and it's problems because OSHA is trying to keep this language very simple, layman type terminology so everybody can understand it. And so instead of identifying hazards, we're identifying problems. And essentially how to identify problems is you use your surveillance techniques that we discussed in an earlier chapter. You look at your 300 injury and illness logs. You look at your workers' comp to see where you've paid for injuries. You do interviews with workers. You do surveys of employees, observations. And so any of that stuff you're doing for surveillance, those can help identify problems. Once you've identified problems, you implement solutions to fix them. And so rather than controls, we call them solutions. Implement solutions. This can be equipment. It can be work practices. It can be administrative controls. And so solutions solve the problems. Step 5 is address reports of injuries. And OSHA wants you to handle ergonomics related injuries, your MSD, sprains and strains, just like you handle any other types of injury in your workplace. They're not special, you handle them the same. And so the extra emphasis on ergonomics related injuries that might be somewhat different from your others is you encourage early reporting of MSD symptoms. So before it develops into disorder, before it becomes recordable, you want to encourage your workers to let you know very early on if they're having any sorts of discomfort that's not going away, any sorts of discomfort, pain, tingling, numbness, any of those symptoms that are not going away, that seem to be brought on by the job and develop from the job. 6 is provide training. Training, I know you've talked about in your other courses, and so basically you provide the training that's necessary for each employee in the workplace. For your workers, it would be, for example, about number 5, who to report to, who to report injuries to, how they're supposed to be addressed. For workers, it would be identify enough that they can recognize the problems, so the hazards, the risk factors. For employees, it would be if you implement a solution, how to use the solution, how to use the control so that it is effective. If you've got a committee identifying problems, or you've got a set of engineers, maintenance, implementing solutions, they should be given training on what would help them in particular in order to do what they need to do. And then lastly, step 7 is to evaluate ergonomic efforts. In this case, some of it is trial and error. You have to know if you made the problem better, or if you potentially made it worse or introduced a new problem. And so you need to identify it, and you go back and do the same things you used to identify problems in step 3. Conduct your surveillance, your 300 injury and illness logs, interviews, surveys, observations, those types of things. Use those to evaluate your process. So that's the steps in an effective ergonomic process. That takes 5 to 6 pages of each set of OSHA's guidelines. The remaining 30 to 35, 40 pages, OSHA gives solutions for each industry. And so, for example, in the nursing home, the big hazard is moving people, and so solutions to help move people will be some of these lift assist types of devices. And so if we try to minimize lifting, eliminate it when feasible, the way to do that, to remove it from the manual part of putting them to manual labor on your nurses, your employees, is to implement these devices. If you have a room dedicated, you can implement a track lift. You can see that it's installed in the ceiling, has a sling hoist type of device to move people. So that's a track lift. If you don't have a dedicated room, if you have to move people from room to room, you can't install a device into just a few rooms. You could use a floor lift that has wheels that makes it more mobile. You can use the floor lifts in different rooms. Also, some more portable devices are, we know that using a restroom, either for showering or actually using the restroom, using the toilet, is difficult. Tight confined space, slipperier room, hard to maneuver, and so there's a shower toilet chair. We know that some people can stand up or not, they cannot stand up themselves, they need help standing up, and so if you use a powered sit to stand, but once you get to standing, they can ambulate, they can walk themselves. It's just that they don't have the leg muscles to stand up, and so if we can use a device to help them do that. And so this covers, this part of the lecture covered OSHA's current approach to ergonomics. The very final part of the lecture, the third part, we'll take a look at, okay, federal OSHA doesn't have a standard, but what about the states?